Welcome back, students, to the second part of social and political movements. This chapter is taken from Political Science of Standard 10th, chapter number 4. This video is presented by Grecienne Misquitta. The following images used in this video are taken from different internet websites. The different topics we are going to cover in this video are social movement, labor movement, women's movement, Tarun Bharat Sangh, environment movements, and consumer movement. As discussed before, let us revise what are social movements. As you know, children, all people in the society cannot participate or be a part of a political party, and thus they cannot participate or contribute to the social welfare of the society. So, some people focus on one particular issue and try to resolve it. When a group of people try to pressurize the government to resolve that problem, they constantly follow up on that problem, build a public opinion, a general opinion about it, and therefore put pressures on the ruling political parties and the government. This type of organized activity is what we call a movement or a social movement. What is a movement? A movement is a collective action where people actively participate in that movement. It can be formed when people come together with the same interests regarding a particular problem. For example, we have the problem of pollution or corruption, etc. Every movement has a social objective or a focused issue. Movements have a leadership. As we know, every movement has a leader. This leader keeps the movement active. Objectives of the movement, program of action, strategy of agitation are decided by its leaders. A strong leader makes the movement effective. Every movement has an organization attached with it. Well, students, in the previous video, we looked at the tribal movement in India, where the tribal people were fighting for their rights over the forest. We also looked at farmers' movement in India during the British period, where farmers started a protest against the colonial government for their rights. And today we will be looking at the labor movement. Labor movement is also known as workers' movement. Labor movement in India emerged in the background of industrialization. Textile industry, railway companies were established in India in the later half of the 19th century. In 1899, railway workers went on a strike for their demands. However, the first organization for resolving the issues of workers was established in the year 1920. This organization is known as the All India Trade Union Congress. In the beginning of the 19th century, industries like textile mills, railway companies were started in India. Labor movement in India thus began during the period of industrialization. In the post-independence period, labor movements started working more and more effectively. As we see in the 1960s and the 1970s, labor movement organized several agitations and revolts. But from the 1980s, the labor movement started getting disintegrated, or one can say dissolved, due to globalization that has affected the labor movement to a greater extent. Globalization basically means the exchange or interaction of products, technology, people, information, and jobs across national borders or the world. In present day India, workers are facing different problems. There are unstable employment conditions, contract labor, no permanency, no financial security, absence of legal protection for workers. These workers are the laborers who work on daily wages, unlimited working hours, insecurity at the workplace, health hazards are some of the problems workers face in India. Women's movement is also known as the feminist movement, or in present day terms, it refers to feminism. We have many women social activists fighting for the rights of women. Women's movement refers to a political campaign in order to bring a change in the life of women suffering from different issues like domestic violence, equal pay, sexual harassment, gender inequality, etc. Hence, these all are the issues that are undertaken in the feminist movement. This movement gives priorities only to women's needs and their issues. These movements are carried out across different nations and communities. It also looks at issues regarding to female feticide, infanticide, etc. Feminism in parts of the Western world has gone through different waves or periods. So in India also we had a feminist or women's movement that took place. Let's look at the women's movement in India. In the pre-independence period, progressive men in India initiated the women's movement. The women's movement aimed at eliminating injustice done against women and ending their exploitation, to help them to lead a respectful life and participate actively in social life. Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar, Raja Ram Mohan Roy, Mahatma Jyotirao Phule, Savitribai Phule, Maharshi Dhondo Keshav Karve, Pandita Ramabai Ranade took the initiative in ending the practice of sati and child marriages in India. Reforms such as widow remarriage, women education, and right to vote to women were possible due to the work of these reformists. After independence, the Constitution gave equal rights to women in all fields. In spite of this, women were not treated equally in many fields. During this period, women's movement aimed at freedom of women. The movement demanded that the women should be treated as human beings. In the latter period, women participated to a great extent in the movements against corruption, caste discrimination, and religious extremism, which made them aware of the injustice against their own selves. Women started taking initiative in organizing against injustice. In India, women's movement is not homogeneous in nature, meaning it is not the same everywhere. However, women's movement at various levels are taking up the issues like women's health, their security, financial independence, and empowerment. Today's women's movement face the challenge of equal education for women and giving women a status and prestige as human beings. Our environment is a gift of Mother Nature to us. This Mother Nature has gifted us with a beautiful natural environment which is depleting day by day due to harmful human activities. In the previous decades, thus, it became very important to carry out different environment movements. Earlier, environment movements were known as environmentalism. In the first decades of the 20th century, environmentalism was also known as conservationism. It focused on spreading ecological awareness among the people in order to protect and conserve nature. Later on, people started fighting for protecting forests. Hence, these movements reached a different effect, where it focused on issues of saving the flora and fauna that were getting extinct day by day due to global warming, pollution, etc. We are aware that environmental degradation is a serious problem at national and international level. At the international level, several movements are working to stop the deterioration of the environment. We see a significant international cooperation in this field. In India as well, there are many movements that are working on different aspects of the environment. The environment movements are taking up issues like the protection of biodiversity, protecting different sources of water, protection of forest, green belt, pollution of rivers, use of chemicals and their ill effects on nature, etc. There have been many movements that have been taken place in India. Some of the major movements is what we are going to discuss here today. The first movement took place in the 1700s in the place of Rajasthan state. The main aim of the movement was to save the sacred trees from being cut down by the soldiers for building a new palace. The second movement, very famous again, is the Chipko movement. It took place in the year 1973 in the place of Uttarakhand, where the main objective was to protect the trees on the Himalayan slopes from being cut down. Basically, people started hugging those trees so that the contractors wouldn't come and cut them down. The next movement was the Save Silent Valley movement, which took place in the year 1978 in the state of Kerala. In order to protect that silent valley and the evergreen forest from being destroyed by a hydroelectric project, this movement was started. The last movement we are going to talk about is the Narmada Bachao Andolan, NBA. This movement took place in the year 1985, where in the state of Gujarat, Madhya Pradesh, and Maharashtra, basically fighting for the Narmada River, a social movement against a number of large dams being built across the Narmada. The next topic we are going to talk about is the Tarun Bharat Sangh. Dr. Rajendra Singh is also known as the Waterman of India. He has brought the water revolution in Rajasthan. He became famous because of building thousands of johads in Rajasthan. Johads are like a present day wells. He revived the rivers in the desert of Rajasthan. He formed an organization known as the Tarun Bharat Sangh, which worked for building 11,000 johads in hundreds of villages. All over India, he started a campaign for water conservation, revival of rivers, forest conservation, etc. His social movement is active for the last 31 years. He won the Stockholm Water Prize, an award known as the Nobel Prize for Water. The next movement and last movement we are going to talk about is the consumer movement. Consumer movement is also known as consumerism. Consumer means the user or customer, and ism means movement. Hence, consumer movement is also known as consumerism. Basically, it is an organized and collective movement of the consumers. The main goal or objective of this movement is to educate, unite, fight for the protections of rights of consumers. Consumer movements are similar to trade unions. They fight against injustice and malpractices done against customers. Consumer movements emerged in India after the Consumer Protection Act that came into existence in the year 1986. This movement has had a broad objective. The movement believes that each member of the society is a consumer. Due to the changing nature of social and economic system, consumers face different problems. Adulteration, basically mixing of different foods, increased cost of items, frauds in weight and measures are some of the most common problems consumers face. The consumer movement works to protect consumers from such types of frauds. The movements increase the participation of people in public life. Students, let's have a quick recap on all the different movements we learnt in today's video. First is the labor movement in India. We learned that the labor movement in India emerged during industrialization period. We also learned that the first organization in India for the workers came to be known as the All India Trade Union Congress. The next movement we talked about is the women's movement, where we learnt different people who took initiative in bringing reforms in the life of women, such as widow remarriage, women education, right to vote, etc. They also resolved in solving the problems of sati and child marriages. The next movement we spoke about is the environmental movement. The environmental movement started because of harmful human activities, and thus that was the only way to stop these activities. Two different movements. We also looked at the Tarun Bharat Sangh, where we learned how Dr. Rajendra Singh helped in creating many johads in the state of Rajasthan. The last movement we looked at is the consumer movement, where we learned that consumers came together to fight for their rights on different malpractices and injustice. Let's discuss some question and answers related to these topics. Short notes on labor movement and the Tarun Bharat Sangh. So we know that the labor movement in India emerged in the background of industrialization. In 1899, railway workers went on strike for their demands. Then we also learned that the first organization for resolving the issues of workers was established in 1920 and was known as the All India Trade Union Congress. We also looked at the different issues laborers face till day in India, such as financial insecurity, insecurity at the workplace, unstable employment, etc. The next short note is the Tarun Bharat Sangh. So we look at Dr. Rajendra Singh, who's also known as the Waterman of India, formed an organization known as the Tarun Bharat Sangh, which specifically worked for building 11,000 johads in hundreds of villages in Rajasthan state. We also looked at all over India, he started a campaign for water conservation, revival of rivers, forest conservation, and wildlife protection, etc. The next thing we are going to look at is the consumer movement came into existence. Give reasons. Consumer movement came in India after the Consumer Protection Act in the year 1986. This movement believes that each member of the society is a consumer. Due to the changing nature of the social and economic systems, consumers face different problems. Hence, it becomes very important to have consumer movements in India to fight problems such as unequal weight and measures, etc. Thank you, students. Hope you enjoyed this video.